Hello everybody, it's vanburman here and welcome to my review for the Fallout London after 11 hours. The London, gosh. And yes, I say 11 hours, it's more like 10. One of those hours purely spent in loading screens, so I'm going to say it's 10 hours. But for full disclosure, there is 11 hours on my save. So there you go. And I just want to start by trying to frame the parameters for Fallout London in terms of this particular review. So while Fallout London is a mod for Fallout 4, in many ways it is also basically kind of like a free game. And I think that is the way in which I'm going to be framing this review when we start going through the particular aspects of how I found Fallout London. And there's a number of reasons for this, and I'll go through them now very briefly. So Fallout London saw a lot of attention from big media news outlets such as the BBC when Bethesda decided to release their new update to coincide with the TV series that broke the Fallout London mod in its previous iteration, which is actually now the iteration that we have currently. Anyway, there's nothing too much about that. But alongside that sort of publicity, we also have presumably had a lot of money invested in it through the Patreon and all the rest of it. So it's had good, funding, not anything like a AAA game studio would get, but still. And in all of that added together, you're going to get a lot of people of considerable talent helping out on the project, which a lot of mods do. And in this very instance, I've heard of at least one person from the Team Fallen team who has joined and been hired by Bethesda off the back of their work or during the work for Fallout London, which is a great thing. And I'm sure it will happen with the Skyblivion mod, for example, as well. We've then also had GOG picking up the mod and releasing it as its own store page and supporting the actual update to the Fallout 4 Game of the Year files. Now, obviously, Fallout 4 Game of the Year is a prerequisite to be able to have that application and to be able to install it on top of and all the rest of it. And it's not to say that GOG have done this completely for free, they have done it for free, I presume, but, done it with only pure intentions of the creative mod in mind. For example, with myself, I decided to buy another Game of the Year Fallout 4 on GOG so that I could sort of keep my two Fallouts quite separate. One just for Fallout London that would be accessed through GOG, and then my Fallout 4 through Steam. So it stops any cross-contamination or issues between the two games because they're different versions and all the rest of it. Although, having said that, GOG were happy to offer the files and gave you even a guide to being able to upgrade your existing version and be able to roll it back as well, which I think is, very admirable and helps people get onto the game. Which does actually bring me to, I guess, a little bit of an appreciation piece. So for GOG, I think it's really great that there has been this precedent, I guess, for that kind of level of integration between their store platform and also the mod game that exists, and I hope that they will do a similar thing for Skyblivion potentially. And well, if they do, that means I'll be once again buying another copy of Skyrim to add to the 12 others that I've bought over the years, but that's fine and probably a fair entry point, right? As in a cost for having that, which Bethesda will gain from, and then Bethesda coming out, which leads me very nice onto Bethesda, when then Bethesda coming out and saying that they don't envisage them doing a Fallout outside of the US. So they haven't gone after or stopped or curtailed, other than the actual update, I suppose, to the Fallout London mod. May not have had the greatest relationship. I feel as though there is a stark difference between how Bethesda have interacted with the Skyblivion team and how Bethesda have interacted with the Fallout London team. But the fact that Bethesda, I guess, understands that they will make money always round by even not helping mods, but not curtailing them in any way. We do also have a Fallout Miami, I think, that's going to be coming out. I've only seen one trailer for it at some point. But yeah, even with something like that may fall into their particular remit of being a location within the US that they may have wanted to explore, And they still may do, obviously, because that one is an unofficial mod and they could create their own one that would be official. They haven't decided to, stop or directly hinder, I guess, the Fallout London thing. So that's why, and I think it's quite fair to judge it that way, or at least that's how I feel about it. And I've done that throughout this particular review. And I have drawn that conclusion between what is a Bethesda-inspired or Bethesda-worked mechanic and either what's been improved on or what the London team haven't done maybe quite as well as Bethesda have done, which is going to happen when you do a total conversion mod, right? And I think for me as well, personally, to make this video, it's quite important to have, I guess, that rounding of the playthrough cycle for this particular project. And because I've played those first 10 episodes and I've decided not to carry on with it, it sort of makes sense to me that I really bring about that squaring off the circle, I suppose, ticking the box and saying, like, I have ended this, but I've ended it with, in a way that I've been able to explain my rationale for why I've decided to either step away from it if I haven't been enjoying it, or, there was things that really put me off or made me unable to carry on playing through the game. Because I think leaving playthroughs half finished is particularly bad form, and it's stuff that I've done in the past, particularly right at the start of my channel. And I've spent a lot of time over the recent years going back to try and really flesh those out and finish those playthroughs that I didn't finish, but I just left. Whereas this one has an ending, it just happens to be this particular review. So, without any more further delay, let's get into it.
I think it's worth starting by talking about the beginning of the game, which is always one of the most relevant ones whenever we begin a new Fallout game. We've obviously been cryogenically frozen, born in a vault. Well, not born in the vault, but in the vault. And all sorts of things throughout the Fallout series, at this time in a test tube, which is quite interesting. So one of the things that I did pick up on, I don't have a problem with the test tube beginning, I think that's okay and perfectly acceptable, is perhaps some of the quality of some of the textures in the test tube, which might seem minor, but it does help fulfill one of my sort of initial, or actually more general criticisms of Fallout London, and that is the thematical continuity of particular assets and placement. So within the test tube itself, it's not an actual, I don't see it as a particular problem. Like, I think it's great the fact that you can break through the glass, for example, and you get the physics of that. I don't think I've ever seen that before in Fallout previously like that. And that kind of thing is actually quite revolutionary. And there is some other stuff that the Fallout, that Team Fallon have done in this mod game as well. But when I consider the thematical continuity of assets, it's clear that while a lot of really detailed work has been done on some of the much grander assets, so obviously I've seen the Westminster bit in screenshots and videos, and the eye as well in the main trailer for the game. And I can obviously tell that things like that, Tower Bridge, have been meticulously put together from the ground up. And that work is absolutely incredible. So I've very often said a couple of times, for example, through my playthrough, and thought it'd be really great actually just to be able to do the exploration of London without even just playing the game, to see exactly all the craftsmanship that's gone into the work. The issue that I then have is that there are clearly bits that have been taken from Fallout 4. Now, I don't have a problem with this from Boston in Fallout 4, but the architecture and styles are extremely different. But like, even with all of that, coming back to the bubbles in the test tube, right? I see what they're going for, because they're going for a very specific vibe. I don't think I've seen it. Like I say, it's not something that I've seen before in the Fallout or Skyrim world. So clearly it has to have been almost made from the ground up. So I do want to temper that criticism about the test tube per se, but throughout the game, there is that lack of continuity. There's that lack of And then moving on to like player interactability. I'm not really sure how you would suggest it. So there's lots of like very obvious doors into places that when you get up to them are either marked as inaccessible inexplicably, or which is fine, not really too much problem with that, but they clearly realize that they understand that there is that expectation that those doors are going to be interactable. Now, these same assets of doors exist elsewhere in the world that don't say they're inaccessible or uninteractable. And that then leaves you with this like false sense of what is actually interactable out within the world of London, so in that area of London, and then what isn't. I mean, the easy way now, I know because because I'm 10 hours in, is that basically anywhere you can't fast travel to is inaccessible from the main London hub area, or the main London area, I suppose, however you want to put it. And that's fine. But the obvious clues for the player are not evident at all, in my opinion. And that really does detract from the good work that has been done, on the effort that's clearly taken place to make this game a reality, right? And I'm not knocking any of the Fallout London for reusing assets from Fallout 4 at all. I think it makes sense. There's some stuff you want to spend more time to create those unique bits, those set pieces that people will love and quite rightly laud, like I have hopefully been able to do here. But also there's that sort of ease of use for the player to get into the actual feeling of the game. It takes a while to really understand how the world works, which is quite funny, even though it is, a Fallout game and runs on all the same mechanics. But yeah, and it does detract from a lot of the really good work that they've done when that doesn't meld coherently. So that for me was probably one of the bigger, because overall it's a negative for me in terms of usability, playability. And when you start pairing things like that with the, quite frankly, excessively long load times that I experienced, and that's not, I don't know if it's a unique thing to me. I've tried updating, I had updates to the game since I've started playing it. There have been updates that have come out. And I've really tried to stay away from other people's reviews and playthroughs because I wanted to experience the stuff that I was going to get to myself. So it might be something that I go and watch after I've made my review. I also don't want to colour my own review by, listening to external sources, particularly if they're people that, and I probably will watch people that I value their opinion on for, playing games or whatever else it may be. Well, yeah, playing games, I'm guessing, because they need to be of the right stature, to be able to review a game like this. So I already mentioned before, load times. I'm not going to sort of hark on them any longer. They were an issue. I'm not sure what the root cause of it is. There were also a lot of crashes as well, straight crashes to desktop without any error or send bug report or anything like that, to even give me some indication as to what might be wrong with the setup. I know PC is very difficult, lots of different lots of different hardware configurations, and then an infinite amount of software configurations. But yeah, it makes things quite frustrating, really, even if I was just playing without doing any of the recording. I should say, actually, while I'm on this particular section, because it's quite apt, my game was installed separately on a SSD, as was GOG, as was the Fallout 4 base files and Fallout London, and all of my recordings were, if you maybe think that's an issue, was also recorded onto a separate NVMe SSD as well, with OBS as well being on my main drive, all that had free space. And not that I've ever had any issues with, like, for example, recording or streaming Fallout 4, as I've done quite successfully on the channel. So I did want to make that point right in the middle of this, I guess, as part of the review, because I think it's quite apt to my overall experience that I had with the game. And hopefully, if you go and play it and you decide you're interested in it, that you don't have those same issues that I did. So moving on to the general gameplay and feel, I suppose, of Fallout London, naturally there's a lot of, well, it does draw on a lot of the stuff from Fallout 4 and the Fallout universe that we've come to love and enjoy. Things like VATS, for example, and also having like a Pip-Boy, although this time it's a Attaboy, which is a bit of a tablet, but there are some cool callbacks to the Pip-Boy itself, and that's used as the base for the Attaboy. So all your normal systems are all basically the same. The cooking systems are all the same. It seems to be modding, weapon modding, that kind of thing. All with their own custom weapons, though, custom sort of advancements throughout the, through like the different receivers and things. Instead of being pipes in this particular game, they're like classed as crude weapons, which is fine. I don't have a problem. I think artistically they look better. They are still as underpowered as the actual pipe guns were in Fallout 4, and all the other stuff that we come to love is all there. So picking your special skills and having the perks and that kind of thing, they're actually really good, and done overall. That system is done just as well, if not better, than how Bethesda have done it previously, because there are a lot more skill checks within the game, so more things require you to have a higher strength or perception in order to be able to pass those checks, and that's actually like really quite satisfying, I guess. With Fallout, maybe Fallout New Vegas is probably the next one that did this as well, by actually utilizing some of your other skills more often in order to be able to pass checks in well, ostensibly in dialogue, right, but also to enable you to unlock items earlier, that kind of thing, through conversation, like having a higher locksmith or perception or whatever it happens to be skill, which I don't think from that RPG element I enjoy. Bethesda maybe have not integrated that enough into their actual game. So it's really good to see Fallout London actually take that pattern and run with it, because it makes more sense. It can lead to more opportunities to be able to tell a better story and to have better interactions with NPCs. And therefore, anything like that is going to be really valuable and worthwhile to the whole game and the experience. So one of the things, like I say, plenty of things to applaud in the game, and that idea for me is particularly good. It's good to see, and it's sort of quite overdue, I guess, for the Fallout franchise. It didn't help me very often because I went for quite a balanced build, a really balanced build, really. And probably didn't prioritize necessarily the right things that I should have done in order to help my survivability and also increase my chances in conversation. Even my charisma wasn't particularly high. Whereas at least if you've spec'd into, wanting to go for a more strength particular build, you will still find different conversations and different opportunities that open up to you because you've gone for that strength build. And that's great because it makes sense. That might be the only one you can pick from that list, but you have a specialty that you can rely on to be able to get you out of, or get you into, potentially, a situation. And then all the traits and stuff are really good. I like how there's the initial trait that you can pick, which is sort of like a positive with a drawback. I don't mind that sort of thing. I like that it wasn't too heavily forced, I suppose, on the player. I think you could only pick 2 of them or none, and there's some really cool ones in there, like for example Sleepwalker, which I didn't pick but I did think looked really cool. The fact that whenever you went to sleep you would wake up in a random location. I mean, there's probably some really good stuff in there in doing that for, doing like a stream, for example, which would keep things really interesting, because you're like, well, I need to get some health and I could do with sleeping, and it's the middle of the night at the minute. And then you wake up in the morning, the other side of the map, and you're like, wow, okay, I'm in an area that I really should not be in. I'm in a lot of trouble now. That sort of thing I often find, really cool. And the fact that it wasn't laboured, given to you at the start to say, well, look, if you want, you can choose to play the game totally different and that make really no sense. Now that's great, and I really enjoy that. But, and here's the big one, because this is the big kicker for me, with the game itself, it does a really poor job most of the time of explaining to you about the factions, how the world works, what's important in that world, and how the pieces fit together in a very nebulous way. Now I'm going to go down a bit of a tangent here, because I'm actually going to talk about Fallout 3 for a little bit. But in Fallout London, you meet a faction called the Fifth Column, I think they're called. And I bumped into them fairly early on. I don't know if I was meant to stumble across them. And their settlement is really interesting. They've got, all of their heraldry around, and they've clearly got like a uniform and lots of quite advanced people with not necessarily big guns, but all of them have guns, which is not necessarily something that you have come across other than at that point, other than having seen the Tommies with their guns as well, right? I think they're fairly well established because they have characters that talk to you and tell you what they're about, and you learn a bit about the Tommies through your interaction as you go through the initial start part of the game, through some terminal entries and that kind of thing. You get to the fifth column and you think, oh, okay, there's lots of people around here. They've obviously got a big area building that they're, like encampment, I guess. They're quite near some hostile factions as well, so there must be some friction going on here. Surely someone will talk to me and give me some, advice for the area, or maybe they'll tell me to F off. It doesn't really matter, but maybe they'll give me some flavour, other than saying it's a nice day for it, isn't it? Or whatever it was, whatever the actual line is. And I found that really jarring because there's no one to talk to. There's no one to interact with to say, oh, what are you guys doing here? I'm just a wayfarer walking around. And the main building's locked off. Now that I presume is for story reasons. You'll go into it later, blah, 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 blah. That's fine. The main building doesn't have to be available. There's other buildings in the complex, some of which are filled with enemies inexplicably, in this very secured complex where there are, 20 or 30 potentially goons walking around that are all of this same particular faction. I've learnt nothing about them other than they maybe look vaguely like Nazis. Not sure if that's what they're meant to be. Just by the black uniform and, very like obvious German inspired guns. And they then go into another building where they happen to have like their barracks, or kind of like barracks, and they're being attacked. And I help them fight off I can't remember exactly what rodent it was. Pig? It was pigs, wasn't it? Pigs. And in that area, I help them out. I fight off the pigs. I get the meat from the pigs and make some bacon or whatever it is. And then in that building, there is still no one to talk to. There's no leader, representative, or anything at all that tells me what this faction is, why it exists, and what particular role they play in the world. Now, there are some posters up and around in the area that says, basically, we want to retake Tower Bridge because it's been taken over by the cannibals, by the beef eaters, and we need to liberate Tower Bridge, right? It's a big monument. It's very close to where their encampment is. Now, interestingly, I thought, oh, you know what? I've actually gone through Tower Bridge. I've taken it over, and the beef eaters are no more. They have been vanquished by me. And surely, we both want the same thing. I've turned up at your encampment. I've helped you fight off the pigs, and now I am here for my reward. And I get there, and yes, like I said, as previously mentioned, there is no one to talk to. There's no interactability with that particular faction, and I have, once again, like I say, no idea how they fit in with the world. They seem very, very passive in their existence. Now, they may well be a more minor faction. When I think back to some of the preview stuff that I watched as before London was coming out, I don't really seem to remember them being mentioned as like a huge major faction, not in the same way like, for example, the Tommies are. But they are clearly big enough and early enough in the game that I might be interested in learning a bit about them, and particularly as me and them at that point have similar interests, one in survival and two in liberating Tower Bridge, that there might be some interactability there. Now, think about the first time, if you have, played Fallout 3. Now, for me, one of the first times I did, I accidentally stumbled across super mutants quite early on in downtown DC. Now, taking through some subways and popping up, I found a little encampment of the Brotherhood of Steel. And they under no uncertain terms, tell me who they are. One, by the way they look, and of course I mentioned that side actually works for the fifth column. But not only do they tell me who they are, they say, we have got great big massive laser rifles and you need to stay as far away from us as possible or we are going to blow your head off. Not actually, they're giving me a threat, obviously giving me a threat there, but they're saying to me, we're not directly hostile to you. But we are superior, or we believe that we're superior to you. And if you don't get in our way, we're not going to hurt you. So straight away, you are an ally of convenience, because should super mutants or raiders be around that particular area, they will fight them because that's what they do. And they will, in essence, vicariously, protect you from those particular raiders and all the rest of it. The fifth column did not act in that way to me at all, because there was no interaction whatsoever. There was no explanation. When I had like enemies, I think it was a fox or something like that came near them, they were not really, they weren't interested. Having said that, though, I don't know if that's like a general pathfinding issue that they've had with the Fallout London itself, because I did have quite a bit of that went on, particularly when thinking about getting into the sanctuary area. The guards didn't come and fight off I think it was raiders, hooligans, whatever it was, properly. Not they are hooligans, aren't they, in Fallout London? So it's all of these bits and it's just indicative of the stuff that I found. I mean, even Eastminster, for example, where there are lots of NPCs that will talk, the information that you're given is extremely sparse. And one of the great things that Fallout has done throughout the years and throughout the games is by really utilizing terminals and that kind of thing to try and tell the story in more of a text-based way. Now, Fallout London did that earlier when I had to go into the crashed plane. And we're talking to the guy outside, and I can't remember, his name eludes me, but you nearby find a terminal that he'd carried back from when he was a conscript for the Tommies, and he'd left them because they were getting to do all sorts of horrendous stuff. And you think, I actually understand a bit more about this guy's one particular motivation. He didn't have too much to say to us anyway, but that's fine because we've read his personal thoughts, if you like, through the medium of the terminal. And we have a bit more of an understanding of potentially what the Tommies are like. And while they're not a threat to us and they're not hostile because they see us as like a law-abiding citizen, I suppose, we don't have any negative interactions with them at that point. But you get the feeling from that particular interaction that you need to be wary of them as you go forward. And that sort of stuff is great. So there's these really real inconsistencies with what is available for certain parties and what's available for others. Still don't know a great deal about the Tommies, but it doesn't matter because the Tommies side after my first 10 hours was probably, I understood the most about them, how they fit into the world and why they were potentially important or bad or good, however you want to see it, and how they have these complex inter-cross relationships. In Eastminster, I didn't even really get that. Like, everyone wanted this tire salesman to basically be the leader, and I made him the leader by getting them to vote for him. And it was the dialogue and writing were extremely wishy-washy for that particular section. I then couldn't even complete the next quest because I had it come up that I couldn't speak the next line of dialogue to one of the particular characters, and you had to get 5 out of 5 on board and that kind of thing. So I was completely locked out of that quest. Now, look, I'm a veteran Fallout Bethesda player. I am no stranger to being locked out of quests and, things not triggering and not working. So I'm not going to judge that particularly too highly. It's a quest I didn't manage to do. Bit cheesed off with the whole area in general anyway, because of that lack of really that like storytelling element that I wanted to see and get involved with just wasn't there. It was really weird. But, the whole thing, and quite stunted as well. I know Bethesda games can be a bit like that, but it was like taking it to the nth degree from what I've seen in Skyrim, for example, that did that quite a lot. And just like characters being in the middle of a conversation with me and just walking off. Like they've got a set path that they're going to get to that point, and whether the player character wants to talk to them or not, that's where they're going. Once again, just more things that added into really jarring my experience and taking me out of it. And ultimately, when you start pairing things like that with really long loading times and the more occasional crashes, then it becomes quite difficult to want to bring yourself to persevere through those kind of things. So I ended up trying to quick save quite a lot as and when I could. Even got to the point of just stopping or pausing my recordings when I was entering in and out buildings and that kind of thing. So trying to find mitigations for it. I have actually another point that I want to make, which is, because we're talking about gameplay and player interaction with the world, it's yeah, some of the stuff I don't have a problem with. For example, like the Thames and the deep water being very heavily radiated. That's absolutely fine. It's something that you have to learn, and I have no problem with that because very quickly the game set me the boundaries that I don't need or want to go into the water, which is fine. But then I have a quest in Thameshaven where I have to get into the main area of the market after I've helped take care of the infestation problem. And the map markers are extremely unhelpful in any sort of built up areas. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, lots of old school gamers, and myself included, have not had map markers of where to get to things. You have to walk around and find your own way, so to speak. But something that Bethesda's always been quite good at, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is guiding the player to the right point that they need to get to. However, it feels like, I don't know what the mechanics work how they work in the background for modding this stuff in, but it seems like there's not a good optimal path for particularly complex interiors to help you get to the point of where you need to get to, which made things quite frustrating. I ended up walking around for what felt like an eternity through and down the same bits of interior, which, as I mentioned, the water happened to contain also a lot of water and was not as irradiated, don't get me wrong, nowhere near as irradiated as the water in the external overworld. But very scared, of course, to go in the water because I've been told the water's extremely bad. I did find the Thameshaven folk voice lines quite jarring as well. In fact, I found most of the voice acting fairly jarring. So I do apologise, voice actors. I know it's not an easy job, and yeah, the ones that I did interact with did grate on me a little bit, and that's like most of the sounds as well were sort of overpowering and not balanced particularly well. Footsteps, music in indoor areas were sort of, the game music was overriding the ambient music soundtrack, if that makes sense. When the ambient music soundtrack was far more important at that time than the game music. If that doesn't make sense, that's totally fine. But there are some examples of it that I had throughout my gameplay that I recorded for, of course. The point I was going to make before I even went on that tangent about sound and volume and all the rest of it was that of difficulty. So the game actually is pretty darn difficult. I guess I would not quite, but almost put it akin to starting Fallout New Vegas and deciding to go straight for the mountains. That's kind of what Fallout London is a bit like from the beginning. Now, I don't have a problem. Like I say, don't have a problem with that. I picked skills where I was particularly low in endurance anyway, so kind of made things very difficult for myself. I have not long, admittedly a couple of years ago now, but off the back of a survival mode on Fallout 4, so I'm no stranger to a bit of difficulty in a Bethesda game. Absolutely not. That's totally fine. It sort of was against my expectations, though, and maybe that's on me, because maybe I should have picked that up when the first real weapon you're given is a butterfly knife, and up until that point you've only used melee. And I don't have a problem with melee weapons at all. I think in the right circumstances, they're pretty good. Now, I picked up a pretty good melee weapon from one of the first bosses, right? Or yeah, I guess it is one of the proper first bosses. And that one's great, but I've not got the build. And most people probably don't necessarily go for unless you're doing a Grognak the Barbarian build, don't normally go for a strength melee focused build, right? So that's great because it subverted my expectations and made things very interesting. So that is actually a big positive for the game, and it's one of the things that I actually quite like that they did, and hopefully that was I presume it has to be a conscious choice to do it that way before you then start getting into fighting enemies where you can get guns from them. But just because they have guns doesn't mean they drop guns, which is one of the things I like a little bit less. One of the things I've always found really good about the Bethesda games is whatever the enemy's got that you're fighting, generally you can have after you've killed them. And that for me is like just a cool thing, right? You come across an enemy that's in Skyrim that's wearing glass armor. I'm getting some glass armor if I kill this guy. That's great. I mean, I know they've tried different things with different qualities and that kind of thing and all the rest of it. But still, yeah, that element was very good for the Fallout London team decided to do, because thematically it makes sense. There shouldn't really be all that many guns. I know it's London, so maybe there's a few more than normal over in the UK, in London, I'm sure, kicking around, and maybe there's more just in general kicking around. But yeah, so you expect not to see really that many guns. In terms of the actual, and then I was trying to do it from the beginning, but trying to get into the actual story, it didn't really have a problem with the opening section. It's all very, mysterious. Don't know what's going on. Who's Smith or Smythe? What does he want? What's he up to? He doesn't think I'm going to survive. Give me a fighting chance, that kind of thing. Sporting chance, sorry. Yeah, great. Okay, I learned a little bit about him as I went on through the time that I played. Not that much, other than a bit of a narcissist. And yeah, that was about it. But that then reminds me that I get into that particular section where I enter a different underground lab, and no one has a name. No one has a name, don't know where things have come from, don't know where things are going to. I can't build the narrative that you're trying to teach me through a terminal to know who interacts with who and who's important to who, because they're all just not important enough to have names. And I could say that for the majority of the characters that I met in Fallout London from the beginning, which is really disappointing, other than the ferryman. But the only guy I can remember, because he's the only one that matters and actually... he's the only one that matters. Obviously, Archie, Churchill the dog, and all the rest of it. Churchill with his blooming footsteps, and Archie a non-combatant follower, which is an interesting take. Once again, don't necessarily have a problem with it. I'm not going to take him with me any longer than I need to, though. That's the truth of it. So, yeah. And probably sums up the majority of the things that I wanted to say for Fallout London. I appreciate it's been a very long video, and there'll be a conclusion coming right up in a second.
And I just sort of wanted to bring things together, explain some of my rationale, and obviously give a overall score. Not that I do give scores, but I don't particularly like them very much. They're quite a blunt instrument, I would suggest. I think for me, one of the big reasons that's put me off Fallout London is, notwithstanding everything else that's been mentioned in the review, but the main aspect that I just didn't find it fun or insightful or engaging enough to want to carry on the playthrough. And I feel as though that comes in stark contrast to my last playthrough, which was Final Fantasy VII. Now, obviously, clearly, that game is a masterpiece. It's been around for a very long time, has had great success, and I would never think to compare Fallout London to Final Fantasy VII. In the way, in any particular stature scenarios, but in terms of my personal enjoyment and willingness to play, I am predisposed to really liking Bethesda's games and Bethesda's style of games. Even with Starfield that came out fairly recently, I don't think it's anywhere near as good as most of the Elder Scrolls or Fallout games. However, I still really enjoyed it for what it was, because it follows those same mechanics and same formula. And I was hoping that that would help me, if you like, get through and persevere with Fallout London. It wasn't a big enough draw, I guess. The things have been changed so much by the London team, and not necessarily all in the right ways. Definitely wasn't particularly very friendly to the player or helping with the user experience, and the amount of crashes and loading times as well make things really difficult, particularly when I'm thinking about recording it. Now, even if I wasn't recording it, I still did not have the desire to think, oh yeah, I can't wait to get up into my office in a heat wave in the UK in summer and play it. Whereas I did still do that when I was playing Final Fantasy VII, because I was engaged and enthralled and wanted to play through it, even though I've played it 5 or 6 times before in the past anyway. Not recording, of course, but still. And that for me is really the big kicker in all this. It was not something that I enjoyed. I'm a fairly cynical and nitpicky, I guess, by nature, if you like. But I do have, I feel as though, anyway, a good amount of patience when it comes to things, particularly those that I'm invested in. And I've been particularly invested in Fallout London because I supported the team on Patreon. I've been following the updates. I spoke about it on the one episode of that podcast that happened that one time, about 18 months ago, whenever it was, maybe longer now. So yeah, there was nothing really that should have meant that I wouldn't have played through persevered and wanted to do so, because all the formula and everything else that exists is, so familiar and natural. I didn't get burnt out with stuff like Starfield, for example, which I saw a lot of the criticism online about, that kind of, it's the old dry formula and there's loading screens. Like, I don't mind a loading screen. It's not a problem. If you need to load the next area, cool. If it's going to take 5 and 10 minutes every time, and I go into an area and there's nothing to do, and I then have to come back out into the main world area, and that takes me 20 minutes, then yeah, that's a bit of a problem, unfortunately. And then the very good reasons for it, I'm sure, but it did not help my experience one iota, really. So it is with a heavy heart that, when thinking about trying to give it a score that's fair, and I guess if you've not seen my videos where I've scored things before in the past, I generally, a benchmark is if it's an 8, because people that's the key thing, isn't it, between how people view review scores. For me, an 8 is a good game, a really good game. So I guess if you're looking at Starfield, somewhere between an 8 and an 8.5 is where I would have put it. Probably more towards an 8. Yeah, something along those lines, because I enjoyed it, right? And, getting a 7 is not particularly very bad. Getting a 7 is like a decent game. So when I consider all the aspects of Fallout London, and I do consider it in the context of it being free and accessible to everyone that has a copy of Fallout 4, and with the fact that there are a number of issues that could seemingly anyway be improved from my experience, loading times I'm sure can be worked on. You've got I don't know about the crashes, maybe there is some stability stuff that can be done, but a lot of it is more fundamental in terms of like artistic placements of where to have lore and what information characters give you in helping you build the world. That kind of thing can be fixed. Of course it can, because we can do almost everything now. We could re-release the whole thing if we wanted to, but that is, like I say, a lot more far-reaching than stability and system improvements. I'm sure a lot of the voice actors and all the rest of it have moved on and now onto other things. So you do really get that first initial wave to get certain things right. But I'd never discount, and I'm happy to come back to it in the future if there are really big updates that address some of those deeper concerns, I suppose. Anyway, I've sort of got away from the point. So for me, it sort of sits somewhere between a 6 and a 7. I don't think it's good enough to get a 7, so I would probably land somewhere around a 6.5 for Fallout London. I hope, and sincerely hope, that if you do go and play it yourselves, you don't experience those same technical issues, I suppose, that I have. Those technical issues, and maybe you are more patient and don't pick up on the same cues that I did, particularly things with the doors and what areas are accessible, what areas aren't accessible, the way that you interact with your factions, that kind of. I don't want to rehash the review. That's been and gone at this point. But yeah, and if you have really enjoyed it, please do let me know. And let me know some of the things I missed as well, because I'll probably be going through now once I've released this particular review and watching parts of Fallout London that I didn't get to experience, because I'm sure I know there are equally as interesting things like the Tower Bridge segment that I have not had the chance to play, and some of the factions that I didn't get to meet. But my confidence level in that content being good enough to stick through another 10, 15 hours or whatever it would be to get there was really rock bottom by the end of my playthrough. And yeah, that's kind of where I finished and ended up. But I hope you enjoyed this particular review. It's not put you off too much from other stuff that I've been doing. But yeah, do sound off. If you think I'm wrong, tell me. That's absolutely fine. I'm happy to agree to disagree. And I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye for now. That's a Fallout thing, right? But it's not. He's not in this one. So I have to say something else. Like, mind the gap. So mind the gap.